Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me back to Japan. It's a delight to be here again and also to see so many familiar faces in the audience. I'm going to take you on a little journey. When I started to think about this presentation, I realised with a bit of surprise and not a little bit of horror that it had been a whole decade of my life that I've spent working on the Olympic project, working on the Cultural Olympiad, and also talking about it. So what I thought I'd do today is share with you some of the things that we did during 2012 and in the lead up to 2012, and some of the reflections that I've had personally on that journey that I hope will be of use to you. I think one of the things that will come across today is the high degree of joined-upness between the various different agencies and organisations involved in putting on something of this scale. And I have a beautiful example of that today, because just sitting here watching Nick's presentation, I realised that many of the slides in my presentation and Nick's and yours are exactly the same. So we are so consistent and so coherent that we have the same presentation, which is great because it means I don't need to explain it. So I can give you my personal perspective on some of the things that you'll see, and also a chance to have a look at them again. So I put this slide up not to show you yet another range of logos. I know that some of you are quite interested in the logo and the brand, and I'm sure that will come up later. But I just wanted to put it up because at one point or another over the course of this 10 years, I will have stood up in front of an audience and talked about the Cultural Olympiad with one of these logos behind me. And I think it demonstrates the various different phases that a project like the Cultural Olympiad goes on or experiences over the course of its lifetime. Within the organising committee, we adopted at least 3 different iterations of the Cultural Olympiad brand that you can see up there. And that was a particular example of us learning as we went along. The logo in the middle is the King's College London logo, where I was until very recently, until last month, where we undertook a 2-year programme of understanding and reflecting on the lessons of the Cultural Olympiad. And some of you were able to join us in a symposium earlier this year when we looked at that. And now, as Graham mentioned, I'm in Hull, which is going to be the UK City of Culture in 2017, and where we are very, very much learning from the experiences of 2012 in not only some of the programming and things that we might do there, the artwork, but how you put a year-long programme of arts and culture together, and some of the challenges that need to be overcome in staging a programme that is meant to benefit the city itself, but also the rest of the country. So we are grappling with some of the same issues that you are at the moment. The 10-year journey that we went on, it started in 2004 when we bid for the Games and were fortunate enough to win them in 2005. At that point, we took the inspiration of Pierre de Coubertin and his view of the wedding of sport and art as our starting point. We formed a very small team at the beginning. There were about 6 of us seconded in from various arts organisations, where we started to look at the bid and interpret it and unpack it. At this point, we realised very, very quickly that in order to fulfil some of the ambitions of the bid, that we needed to be able to make sure and to demonstrate that the work was going to happen all around the United Kingdom, that this wasn't something just for London. It had to be a presence all around the UK. After all, not everybody is going to be able to come to the host city. Not everybody was going to have a ticket to the sporting event. So we needed to find a way in which the event could come to people wherever they were. So one of the things we did that Nick has already mentioned and Graham has mentioned is set up a network of creative programmers, which were people all around the UK. There were 12 altogether, whose job it was to ensure that there was a rich and varied programme of work all around the United Kingdom under the one umbrella of the Cultural Olympiad and the London 2012 Festival. And Paul is going to tell us more about that and how he managed that process in the West Midlands. It also became apparent early on that we needed to work with the IOC and colleagues within the organising committee to make sure that access to the Cultural Olympiad was as broad as possible. And so we created the Inspire mark and the Inspire brand. And I'm sure that we'll come on to that later as well. As Graham mentioned, we created a Cultural Olympiad board as part of our governance arrangements in 2010. And this ensured that we had support and buy-in from some of the most important and influential people in the arts and cultural world, as well as government and our main funders as well. We announced our programme, we grew our team, and in 2012 we delivered, and I'll show you in a moment some of that. But I think perhaps one of the most interesting phases for me has been after 2012 and after the Games, where we've been able to step back and look at actually what did we do, and what worked, and what didn't work, and if we were going to do it again, what would we do differently? So I think I'll touch on some of that as well today. I think one of the things to highlight is what we tried to do at the outset. We decided that we needed to have a world-class cultural offering right at the very heart of the Games. If people were going to come to London to experience and to watch the world's best athletes perform at their very best, then what we should offer is an opportunity to see world-class art being performed at its very best as well. And that could be work from the United Kingdom, originated in the United Kingdom, or from overseas. And we did both things. So that was really what we were trying to do, was to show and go back to Pierre de Coubertin's original vision of putting art next to sport as part of that Olympic vision. And so how we were going to do that was to bring the Games to the whole of the United Kingdom, making sure that there was something everywhere for everybody. To really try very hard to attract new audiences, so not just those people who always go to the theatre, who always attend museums, but to think about how we attract new people. And a key part of that was to have a commitment that a lot of the opportunities to experience the Cultural Olympiad will be for free. So what we delivered, Nick, you'll recognise some of this. In summary, it was the biggest arts and cultural programme ever delivered by the United Kingdom. It was enormous. There were events up and down the length of the country. And as I said, we fulfilled one of our aims in that 80% of attendances were actually for free. One of the things I find interesting in this slide is that 85% of people who attended saw arts and culture and the Cultural Olympiad as a positive addition to the Games. So the Olympic Games and the sport, I'm not a sport fan, by the way, but the sport looks quite similar wherever you go, whether you go to Beijing and look at the 100 metres, or you're in Vancouver and you're looking at the ice skating. It's pretty much the same. The opportunity to differentiate a city comes through its culture, comes through its art. And so I think by putting arts and culture front and centre is really an opportunity to enhance the offering. Sport is always going to be at the centre. It's always going to be the main thing within an Olympic Games. But I think we can add something very valuable by putting arts and culture into the mix as well. Another thing that we should perhaps highlight at this point is that people are more willing to experience or have a go at arts and culture if it is associated with the Games. So we had people attending arts and cultural events because it's part of the Olympics, because it's part of London 2012. It almost it felt a little safer for people to try something. So we had people going to the opera or people going to the theatre who hadn't been before because it was part of the official programme. A little bit more on audiences, and again, Nick has touched on some of this, but one of the things to perhaps pick out is that we managed to attract a young audience. We set out to bring in new audiences, and particularly young ones, and so 30% of our attendees are under 35. And again, picking up on some of those things about the Games effect of the Olympic and Paralympic project driving audience and first-time attenders. Nick already mentioned the RSC. We've got the opera there, the English National Opera. That's at 60% of audiences to the Dr. D opera had never been before. So it really does manage to break down some of those barriers to people attending. For those of you interested in this kind of thing, this is how we structured the Cultural Olympiad. Again, it was an evolution of thought, and this chart, I think, demonstrates how the project evolved over time. We started off by conceiving of the Cultural Olympiad, including the Inspire programme, which carried on throughout a number of years in the lead up to 2012. The Inspire programme was fantastic in that it generated activity all around the country, and also some of those really exceptional ideas and projects that found their way into the London 2012 Festival during the summer of 2012. Similarly, the Cultural Olympiad worked across a whole range of art forms over a number of years to develop people and skills like the Unlimited programme and others, so that by the time we got to the summer of 2012, our arts and cultural sector had grown its capacity and was able to deliver a world-class arts festival. So it's a complicated picture, but I think eventually it enabled us to get where we wanted to go, which was that in the summer of 2012, we had a great festival. Some of the things we had to create along the way in order to get there, and I think the experience, those of you who work in the organising committee will recognise some of the challenges and some of the tensions of creating the space and the ways of operating an arts programme within what is effectively a sports event company. And sometimes the two things don't fit very comfortably side by side. So I've already mentioned the Inspire programme is something that we developed in order to meet the demand for arts organisations to get involved in the cultural programme. It worked and it was successful, and in fact it was so successful in that volunteering and sport and education adopted the programme, and it became a games-wide programme, but it started out within the Cultural Olympiad. We developed the London 2012 Festival mark, and those of you with sharp eyesight will notice that it doesn't have the Olympic rings or the Paralympic agitos in it. So this gave us a little bit more flexibility in what we were able to programme. And aligned to this, we developed a series of new brand guidelines which enabled us to accommodate, in some circumstances, projects that had, or venues that had existing commercial sponsorship arrangements. So that's a little bit on the how we did it. Manami asked me to talk about some of the projects that you might not have heard of before. We hear a lot about Unlimited, we hear a lot about Sacrilege, we hear a lot about some of those really big scale projects. And so I've now got a few examples of some of those projects that fulfilled a number of different remits. So we know that cultural tourism is one of the opportunities that a host city and a host country has in order to sort of ride on the back of the games, and something that the games can promote. They can also help the whole of the country get involved and feel part of it. So accessibility and programming work that was near to where people were, so that they didn't have to come to London, was a key thing for us. So I've got some examples of that too. And then finally, surprise and delight. Sometimes you just have to let artists have their flight of fancy and come up with brilliant ideas, and then find a place for them. So we had a number of those things as well. So cultural tourism. By working very hard, not just through the Cultural Olympiad, but also through other games-related programs like the Torch Relay and volunteering programs, so programs that went around the United Kingdom, we ended up in a place where 43% of people agreed that the events in 2012 made them more interested in getting out and about and exploring the country. So there really was a really powerful role that the arts and cultural programme, the Cultural Olympiad, but also the other 2012 programmes played in encouraging people to get out and about a little bit more. We've already heard about the indicators from Visit Britain that meant that creativity, heritage and culture uniformly went up in terms of indicators. So there was something interesting going on there. So now I've got a couple of images. This is of Stonehenge, so it's not the traditional image of Stonehenge, but I chose this one because it shows the line of people extending into the distance, which gives you a sense of how popular this was and how in an extraordinary period like the summer of 2012, you can get people doing incredible things, queuing up for hours in a muddy field to come and have a look at something wonderful. It also shows you the extent of some of the branding that we rolled out there as well. So this was a project called Fire Garden, which took place at night. I haven't got the image here, but you may have seen it, which illuminated the area around Stonehenge with some beautiful, beautiful works of art. But this was the queue leading up to it. This is a project in the northeast of England. In fact, this project went around the country, but this particular image is one taken in Northumberland at a castle. It's called Peace Camp. And this, again, was a series of tents that are illuminated from the inside. And inside each tent is a recording of poetry, of love poetry in different languages from around the world. So picture the scene, you're in the most beautiful part of the country, you're walking around and all you can hear is love poetry in different languages. A really, really powerful and evocative piece. This is in Northern Ireland, it's the Giant's Causeway, and this is a project that quite simply planted flags around the landscape, but was an enormous draw. So the Giant's Causeway is a place that people visit anyway, and this was yet another reason to come and see art in the landscape. So it's another one of those projects that drove tourism, another one of those projects that got people out and about around the country. This one is called Battle for the Winds in Weymouth. So Weymouth hosted the sailing during 2012. And this was a project that welcomed the sailing events to Weymouth. It's called Battle for the Winds. And this particular image is of 2012 people wearing torches, fire torches, wading into the sea. So it's incredible what you can get people to do under the banner of the Olympics and Paralympics. But again, something that drove people to a particular venue for arts and culture. The next heading is somewhere near me. So this was our attempt to really engage people and communities from all around the country. No matter where you were, we would come to you. And I think we did not too badly, because here we have a stat that says awareness of the London 2012 Festival reached 41% of the population in London and 29% across the whole of the UK. Pretty high figures, actually, for an arts festival. This is an image of Dizzy Rascal at the BBC One Big Weekend that was held in Hackney in East London over a great weekend. So you can see some of the size of the crowds there. The One Big Weekend is held every year in a city that has a particular need for support, perhaps, and so it goes to unfashionable cities, if you like. We persuaded BBC Radio 1 to come to East London, that place that Graham talked about, that I live in, by the way, that you perhaps used to have a reputation of being difficult, but actually nowadays is a brilliant, vibrant place to live. It has a young population, and it has a population that has challenges around deprivation, around some of the sort of bigger social challenges. And so one of the things we wanted to do was to do something really big and powerful for the young population, who we knew perhaps couldn't afford tickets to go and see the sport. But what we could do was to bring some of the world's biggest pop stars to Hackney for a weekend. So that's just one example of what we did. This is another one at the other end of the country. This is in Raploch in Stirling. This was one of the events to open the start of the London 2012 Festival. This is Gustavo Dudamel, who held a concert under the Sistema project with young people from a housing estate in Stirling. He worked with them, taught them how to play classical musical instruments, violins. It perhaps wasn't the most beautiful sound on the ear, but it was actually a beautiful, beautiful project to witness, even in the rain. This is one in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, called Noise Flood. This is, as you can see, it was held in the zoo, and it was a project involving puppets and young children, and was an enormous amount of fun. This one is in Wales. called A Day in Avion, which was a disused aeroplane that moved around the country that people could climb aboard and sort of immerse themselves in. This one is called the Boat Project, where people could donate pieces of wood that had a significance to them. So it could be your favorite cricket bat or your, I don't know, a toy that you'd had as a child or something. People donated, over 1,000 people donated pieces of wood that were then made into a boat, which then sailed around the coast. So it's a lovely thing. So these are just a few examples of projects that were put together by artists in different parts of the United Kingdom. Final category is those things that just surprise and delight us. So this is where you get perhaps some of the most iconic images, some of the strongest images throughout the programme. This one is called Hang On a Minute Lads, I've Had a Great Idea. It's taken from the final scene of the film whose name I've just forgotten. The Italian Job, thank you. The Italian Job, where Michael Caine and the group of bank robbers are hovering on the precipice about to lose their gold. This was at the Delaware Pavilion, and it is a coach pivoted on the edge of the gallery. Fantastic project. This is a piece of street art in Bristol, which was a whole street art project and graffiti project. Some beautiful, beautiful images. This is, I think, one of my favourite images, actually, of the Cultural Olympiad, which is looking at art and disability in a really different kind of way. Sue Austin creating the spectacle. Piccadilly Circus I won't touch on because I think you've seen this before, but basically I think it was 2 tons of feathers over Piccadilly Circus one evening. Great amount of fun. You've seen this image already. This was a series of beautiful dance pieces, aerial pieces within cathedrals. And this was one in Greenwich in London, incredible outdoor piece. So these are some of the kind of things that you can let artists kind of create and inspire and really stick in the memory. What we learned, remarkably similar to Nick's list, but a couple of things that I would emphasize here. Having one clear vision all around the country is absolutely critical to making this work. Having one point of leadership within the organising committee, preferably on the board of the organising committee, that can set the tone, that can set the pace, that others then go and interpret, but having one overall framework. Exploiting the momentum of everything else that's happening over the summer of 2020, be that the launch of the mascots or the volunteering programme or the torch relay, thinking about how the Cultural Olympiad can build on those points of interest and momentum is really helpful. And then finally, having one brand. One of the things that is absolutely imperative is that however the Cultural Olympiad brand evolved over time, it was still one brand, and it was the same brand that was used by all the cities all around the country. Anything more than that, if you start to develop multiple identities, consumers get confused. And I think it's really useful to think about who we're doing this for at the end of the day. It's for people to come and have a fantastic time, whether they live in a local town or city, whether they live in Tokyo, whether they're visiting from around the country or they're coming from overseas. They want to experience a fantastic summer of sport and art. So I think that's why one brand really helps. I know we'll come up to questions on some of the things here, but in the meantime, thank you very much.